Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, when Fukushima first began melting down, TEPCO threw sawdust and diapers into the disaster hole. Amazingly, it didn't work. In America, when the Deepwater Horizon oil platform exploded, BP tried plugging that disaster hole with golf balls and rubber scrap. Alas, that also didn't work. Now in the UK, welly-wearing David Cameron is out in the drowning Tory heartland, throwing sandbags, soldiers, and cash impotently into the floodwaters. But, Dave, all the snooker balls in Sheffield cannot stop the rising tide that is sinking all boats into your black hole of debt economy. Because it's the triple crunch of environment, energy, and economy. And no junk shop can save us now. Not even a 147 will save us. Dave, we've been snookered. Stacy.
Yes, Max. It's the triple crunch of environment, energy, and economy, and all the buffoons are throwing everything into the risk that we see around us. The first headline, Max, is golf balls fall short coping with 21st century disasters. Chucking diapers and golf balls at multi-billion-dollar calamities show methods to deal with failure are primitive at best, even as the global hunt for energy enters new frontiers of risk. Disasters beyond the coping abilities of a single company or even a country have prompted suggestions that a global body with military-scale technical resources is needed. Now, that's Bloomberg News, and they're talking in particular about energy, whether it's TEPCO or the Deepwater Horizon disaster. But, you know, look at this disaster heading our way here to the UK.
Yeah.
How many snooker balls, Max?
Snooker balls? No, do you think snooker balls could fill this disaster?
Well, it's the equivalent, you know, in Japan they have many diapers, the adult-sized diapers that they threw into TEPCO. In the south of the United States, they have lots of golf courses down there, so they threw golf balls.
Here in the UK, it's snooker balls. How many snooker balls would it take to stop this disastrous hole from wiping out Britain? Let's ask Ronnie O'Sullivan.
He's the master.
Let's ask Ronnie O'Sullivan, the current and 5-time snooker champion, who's right here in the studio. Ronnie, welcome to the Keiser Report.
How you doing, Max? How you doing? You all right?
All right. I saw you at the Masters. Another brilliant performance, by the way. Thank you very much. But today we're talking about disasters and snooker balls. So you're the 5-time current world champion. Approximately how many snooker balls do you think would it take to show Ronnie the photo here? Stop this storm.
Oh, is that a storm?
Yeah.
Wow. Lots of snooker balls.
Lots?
A lot.
Yeah, millions, billions. Billions of snooker balls.
Billion snooker balls.
Billions.
I don't think we have enough, but that actually could save the economy if we had to manufacture a bunch of snooker balls.
Yeah, exactly. They have to manufacture 1 billion snooker balls, and it would stimulate the economy here in the UK, because I believe snooker balls are manufactured here in the UK. It's the world leading in snooker balls, before China, of course, gets into the game. Well, fantastic, then.
But this is the thing. Actually, the article points out that, you know, there's a rising risk as we're going further out into the deep waters of the oceans to drill for energy. We're going, there's more and more risk in the financial system. So just like throwing diapers and sawdust at these big the energy catastrophes, we're throwing all sorts of cash at financial disasters because we don't know what to do otherwise.
Well, this is the tragedy of it all, isn't it? Because, for example, I don't know if you're going to get into this or not, but Cameron is saying there's unlimited money to throw at this disaster.
That is our first headline.
Yeah.
And, you know, I also wanted to point out just below the environmental disaster at the top of the page is the economic disaster at the bottom of the page, where Mark Carney is saying that the interest rates are on hold at near 0% because the recovery is unsustainable. But let's talk about what, despite this, this fragile recovery in the UK economy, here we have David Cameron saying, UK floods, David Cameron pledges unlimited public funds. Prime Minister seeks to assert his authority over natural disaster with promise of wider army role and more money. A resolute David Cameron vowed to marshal the forces of the state to tackle the flooding crisis, pledging a wider role for the Army and unlimited public funds to protect families.
Right, this is cognitive dissonance because this disaster here on the climate side, the flooding, is a direct result of totally ignoring the realities of man-made global chaos. So they totally ignored this for years, and now suddenly it's caught up to them. The economy is crashing because of interest rates being forced lower, which is keeping these zombie banks alive, and they're cannibalizing and parasitizing the UK economy. So this is cognitive dissonance, all merging into one Armageddon cacophonous nightmare of too much liquidity in flooding, too much liquidity in quantitative easing. Everyone's drowning to death. They're drowning in debt. They're drowning in Cornwall. They're drowning. Everyone's drowning because of these frickin' David Cameron's got his head up his schming. Why can't he learn a decent craft like snooker? At least people who play snooker are doing something useful for the economy, not frickin' David Cameron, who's out there posing in the House of Commons. He's a financial illiterate.
You bring up a good point, is that it was bringing forward all the future consumption via the economy, via the monetary system and 0% interest rates. So because of that, we've already spent many decades into the future, which means we're heading out far out into the oceans to find oil, despite the fact that our technology not being decades into the future. So we have primitive technology relative to the risk we're taking on.
Yeah, well, not to mention the fact that this whole story in the last couple of years of austerity is a hoax. It's a joke. What austerity? Suddenly there's all this magical money to bail out Tories in Cornwall? What about the magical money to bail out the people in the bedroom tax scandal? Magical money to bail out people who are being cut off the NHS? Where is this magical money coming out of Dave Cameron's schwing? What's that all about? Why doesn't it help people that are not his direct supporters? When he's criticized as being a prime minister only for the rich. I mean, this is a clear example of this. His rich buddies are being flooded. Oh, there's some magic money.
Exactly. And in fact, the quote about this in the article says that in words that may yet come back to haunt him, Cameron said, quote, "My message to the country today is this: money is no object in this relief effort. Whatever money is needed for, it will be spent. We will take whatever steps are necessary." He insisted, quote, "We are a wealthy country and we have taken good care of our public finances. And yet, we have the bedroom tax, with thousands of people, many severely disabled or pensioners, being thrown out into the street because apparently that's not a disaster worth a relief."
Yeah, these words are come to haunt him now. This is the ghost of Christmas present. This is a disaster in the making today. And of course, you know, Mark Carney over at the Bank of England says, you know, the economy's not recovering and we need to keep interest rates low. So there's a direct contradiction to what Cameron is saying. He's being repudiated by his own Bank of England chairman. So those two guys are not on the same page. The economy is being whacked to death because interest rates are being kept artificially low. That's the primary cause of the economic malaise. It's also the primary cause for this flooding because its malinvestments over the last 20 years have taken money out of stuff that could be useful, like preventing floods, and put it in the bank of house speculators. You see what I'm saying? It's a misallocation of money engineered by these banking terrorists. It's clear and simple as the nose on your face as the snooker ball going into the hole, giving Ronnie Sullivan another world championship. The guy's on fire. He's going to the Crucible. He's going to win again. You heard it here. I'm calling it. 6-time world champion. Only behind that other guy. Higgins?
Hendry.
There's no other guy.
Who won more? Higgins?
Hendry.
Nobody.
Who's won?
Hendry. Stephen Hendry.
Stephen Hendry?
7, yeah, 7.
Well, what's the fastest he's ever done 1:47?
Oh, about 7, 8 minutes maybe.
Well, was he smoking dope or something? I mean, that's like a grandma could do it in 7 minutes. Well, you did yours in what,
5:20.
520 minutes, 147 points in 5 minutes and 20 seconds. It's like bam, 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 bam. Even frickin' Einstein could do that.
So, Max.
Yeah.
We were talking about the triple crunch, and we were talking about over in not just Cornwall, Somerset, and places like this where you're seeing people made homeless because their homes are flooded, about 6,000 of them. And then you talked about housing speculation. Now, that catastrophe of liquidity of money is also making people homeless but distressed. Tweet from the Telegraph reads, "If salaries had risen as fast as house prices, an average couple would earn £44,000 more a year."
Right, the house is making more money for them than their job. Okay, that's ludicrous, because it means that the house prices are trading at 5, 6, 7 times multiple of income. That's completely unsustainable. It's only being kept artificially aloft through this manipulation of interest rates, which comes, you know, what's happening in Canada right now? Before we came on, and I looked at the press coming out of Canada, that housing bubble that Mark Carney inflated during his stay as Bank of Canada governor is now bursting, and those people are going into a massive flood of negative equity. Okay, that's the legacy of Mark Carney. He's a serial bubble blower, and when he blows up this economy, he'll go to some other frickin' country and ruin their economy. He's a disaster.
One of the worst areas in terms of wages not keeping pace with the inflation of house prices is Hackney. Hackney wages would need to be 4 times higher to keep pace with house price rises just over the past 15 years. So they are earning in Hackney the equivalent of £31,304. But if they wanted to keep pace with house price inflation there, the £31,000 would need to be £131,000, 924 per year.
Right. Again, it's cognitive dissonance, because here in the UK you had a strike from transportation workers, and the rail system was shut down for a couple of days, and people are saying, "Oh my God, how could you're victimizing us? You're penalizing us. We can't get to work. Why should we pay you anything?" Well, without paying anybody anything, you're not going to have the income to support this housing bubble. The only way you can support the housing bubble is by quantitative easing, free money printing out of the Bank of England, which has an end date. It blows up like every single Ponzi scheme in history. This one will similarly blow up. And then you'll be begging your neighbor who's working down at the subway stop for a nickel to buy a cup of coffee because you're guggling. I'm an idiot. Don't you understand? There's a connection. Economics is about connections.
Well, in fact, so they need to earn £131,000 there. Forget all of the central London, where you're going to need to earn $290,000 or more just to keep pace with inflation. But as you see, David Cameron, in order to stop this storm coming in, there's 3 more coming. If you look on the front page of the Daily Mail today, there's 3 storms out into the Atlantic heading this way. In order to stop that, he's saying he's going to give, no matter how much money needs to be printed, he's going to throw it at this storm, which of course is going to drive up house prices in Hackney, which means by the end of this year, end of 2014, those people will need to earn £250,000 instead of £131,000 to afford their properties.
You know, you said this vision of these 3 storms coming into London. It's like, but there's Ronnie O'Sullivan, right? And he's in a parallel universe. And it's being ripped to shreds by cosmic forces. But he's still sinking pots. Somehow, between Ronnie O'Sullivan and the devil, it would be Ronnie O'Sullivan. He would win. It's not natural. It's not natural.
Well, he's an
alien. He's from another universe. On that note, we have to say goodbye. Stacy, thank you.
I'm off to go find 1 billion Snicker balls.
Hey, Ronnie, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us on the show, Max. Cheers.
All right, stay tuned for the second half. A whole lot more.
There's a saying here, when you're in the Arctic, you have the entire world at your feet.
She looks like a fairly simple ship, but really she's not simple at all.
Only a handful of people ever have access to the nuclear icebreakers.
The real king here is the polar bear, and icebreakers come second.
Not a single complex expedition to the Arctic can be conducted without the Russian nuclear-powered fleet of icebreakers.
We've undertaken a unique operation.
The Northern Sea Route. Russia's Arctic icebreakers.
Is obviously more for the ladies because it's pink.
If women wanted to avoid rape, they really needed to buy guns and learn how to use them.
Pull down, there's your gun.
This is the one that I want to go with.
Once again, it's the fear factor. Women are definitely a target of the gun lobby.
You don't want to kill them.
We're not wanting to kill anybody, but if somebody, this would hurt them.
What I'm noticing more and more is this really scary marketing tactics, which implies that women have some sort of moral obligation to own guns to protect their families.
Young girls shoot out here too, so we do have a pink one.
More kids, young kids, choke on food than are killed by firearms.
If being armed made us safer in America. We should be the safest nation on Earth. And we're clearly not the safest.
Low cholesterol, PMS, depression. These perfect spheres will ease your pain and improve your life. Are you that sick? Pharma knows better. Branding illness on RT.
Do we speak your language?
Informativo en RT.
Want news, programs and documentaries in Spanish? What matters to you? Breaking news, alternative angles, hidden stories. Are you here? Then try RT Spanish. To find out more, visit actualidad.rt.com.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Nafeez Ahmed, an author and an environment writer for the Guardian newspaper, where he tracks the geopolitics of environmental, energy, and economic crises via his Guardian-hosted blog, Earth Insight. Welcome to the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
Okay, so you write about the triple crunch of environment, energy, economic crisis. Clearly, we've got this flooding going on in the UK, so we're having you on. Talk a little bit about it.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, it's a lot of people are recognizing that the nature of the weather at the moment is a little bit unprecedented. It's not been seen for a good few decades. This intensity of kind of extreme rain and flooding and storms and things like that. So it's kind of certainly, I think, for the incumbent Tory party, it's come as a bit of a shock because it's you know the standard line is, you know, we don't really need to do anything urgent on climate change. Obviously, we need to do some things, and suddenly, you know, we've been hit unexpectedly by this extreme weather.
It is a shock. It's like almost people make the comparison to Katrina disaster in America, where they had this enormous breach of the levees and the floods, and everything collapsed. And there's David Cameron in his wellies, looking, you know, like the deer caught in the headlights. Like, where did this come from? And you know, it's the cost of cognitive dissonance. You know, for so many decades, like climate chaos was something that everyone thought they could deal with next year and the next decade, but it's here today, right?
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the things that climate scientists keep trying to say, is that, yeah, we can't tell you exactly what will happen next year. We can give you the broader trends, and the broader trends are there will be more extreme weather, but we don't know how that's going to play out. What they are saying is that, you know, there's going to be a greater probability of wild cards like this. So this is the problem. You know, there's a greater probability that you can have damaging events. I mean, one year might be fine, another year might be really, really terrible. This is just, again, so there is certainly a bit of chance, but I think the problem is that the climate change loads the dice in favor of slightly more erratic events, and this is what we're seeing. And the repercussions are worrying, because now we've got like some 2,000 soldiers on standby around the country to kind of respond. So there is this danger that if we don't actually deal with things properly, we end up having the military to come in and deal with things and mop up. But that's not a great thing in the long term, because one, that's very costly. Two, of course, then there's going to be questions about, well, who's going to be running our civilian institutions, you know, in 10, 20 years' time if things get worse? You know, are we going to see a militarization of our society, a creeping militarization?
Which would be another trend similar to what we've seen in the U.S. But now, looking at the whole climate debate going back 20 years, 30 years, it seems like climate scientists 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, laid out a scenario. And pretty much everything they predicted is now in your face. This is what they've been saying. So when I watched the BBC this week, at the end of their reports on this catastrophe, they'll say, almost as an addendum, oh, and some think it might have something to do with climate change. When clearly that should be the lead of the story. Climate change is here, climate chaos is here, and it's going to be extremely costly. Why is the mainstream media here, I mean, not the Guardian, obviously, but why is like the BBC, not to pick on them, but they're the state broadcaster, why are they pushing the propaganda that this might be an issue instead of coming out and saying, this is a frickin' problem.
It's an interesting question because, I mean, it's something that's bothered me about the BBC's reporting on climate change. There's been this tendency, and it's funny you figure out that because the BBC's actually been pretty bad on the way they handle climate change. They have to have balance. And the way they do balance is, if you have climate scientists talking about climate change, then to balance that, you'll have a complete non-scientist, wacko, you know, kind of theorist who maybe has an economics degree or something, funded by the oil industry.
To make it, if there was, to represent the debate, they would have 99 scientists talking about the reality of climate change and one wacko. But because it's the BBC, they'll have one scientist versus one wacko. So the perception from people watching TV is that there's an equal debate, that there's somehow a debate going on here. But it's not a debate. You know, leading up to the Iraq War and all these other wars that the UK spends all this money on, the reason that they went in there, according to Tony Blair and others, is that there might be 1% chance of there being a weapon of mass destruction. So we're going to blow £1 trillion on that 1% chance that there might be, and of course there wasn't. Here you've got a 98 to 99% probability. There's only a 1% chance that this climate catastrophe is not happening, and yet the response is 0. I mean, I don't mean to, you know, but talk about, I'm very frustrated by this because I've been talking about this for years, and now that it's happening, it seems that the reality of this problem is still not getting into people's nut.
Well, I think there's public opinion, which is obviously subject to that manipulation, the various interests that control the media discourse, and they're trying to put out whatever their view is. But I think, you know, the fundamental problem is who really has captured government policy? What are the interests that have captured government policy? And what is worrying is that it's not that David Cameron, perhaps, you know, and other people around him don't believe in climate change. And I think the Tory party is extraordinary. You have the kind of counterpart in the States with the Tea Party and the Republicans, and clearly you have elements who just deny climate change. But what's interesting is that all those deniers consistently have links to the fossil fuel industry. And whether some of them actually believe what they're saying, and I think a lot of them do, but some of them clearly maybe aren't interested in the truth and just want to make sure that they sustain the current structure of the global economy, which is heavily dependent on fossil fuels and the continued exploitation of fossil fuels.
Right, the fake denial industry, funded by the fossil fuel industry, for some reason, unlike the fake people that support GMO food, funded by GMO foods, they get called out. The people who used to support cigarette smoking, as supported by the tobacco industry, they finally get called out. But the clear connection between fossil fuels and climate change denial, for some reason, even smart folks in the U.S., like the Drudge Report, who does a lot of reporting, or the people who are tapped into the Drudge Report, my friends in Austin. But you know, your work covers not just the environment, but the economy, and really how it all works together geopolitically. And there's another big element to this that people should understand. It has to do with food. So talk about the food connection.
Well, the food crisis is we've been starting to see that with the high food prices since the 2008 banking collapse and the kind of coinciding with high oil prices. We've seen high food prices, and we've heard in the news, you know, it's affected a lot of places. It's affected things in the Arab Spring, for example. It's kind of kicked off riots. They've had food riots in Africa, and you know, there's been this kind of perception that okay, there's a food issue here. But again, in the mainstream debate, it's like, well, this thing might go away. Food production will catch up soon. It's kind of a temporary issue. But this is a result of all of the different factors coming together. You've got climate change, when we've had this bouts of extreme weather and erratic weather in all of the major food basket regions over the last few years, in Russia, in India, in the United States. Grain, wheat, rice, all of our main staple food crops have faced harvest failures, successively in the last few years because of these droughts and floods and all that kind of thing.
Okay, let me jump in, because you know, this goes back 100 years. It goes back to Malthus, who famously was talking about the misery of expanding populations and not being able to be fed by limited supply of food. And then every decade or so, every 50 years, every 100 years, there's a technological revolution. In the 60s, you had the Green Revolution, as it was called then, where advanced use of fertilizers and phosphates and everything that swept the globe, and the food crisis was abated. And so the critics will say, why isn't that going to happen again? There's going to be a technological solution, genetically Monsanto, who's inventing stuff in their laboratories. Why won't technology save the day again as it has in the past?
Well, I think the problem with this debate, as it's put forward in that way, is that they're very abstract and theoretical, and both of those sides are wrong. You know, you've got the Malthusians who are like, it's all to do with too many people and we're all going to die. And then you've got the kind of other extreme, which is, don't worry, technology is going to save us, it's cool. And the reality is that you can't prove either of those things. Those are just abstract and unscientific statements. What we need to do is look at what's actually happening, why it's happening, where it might go, and is there stuff we can do about it? I think the reality is that, I mean, there's been a number of peer-reviewed papers which are quite worrying, which have been looking at crop yields over the last decade or so, and the reality is that industrial agriculture does seem to be reaching its limits in its current form. And it's because of desertification, soil erosion, climate change, and also, you know, the high food prices are being underpinned by the rising oil prices, which is to do with this other issue of energy depletion. Fossil fuels are becoming much more expensive.
Okay.
Oil is becoming much more expensive.
In the oceans, what percentage of the fish used for food is now depleted? Over 90%, right?
Absolutely.
90% of the fish, for food fish, is that what you call them? Food fish, fish for food. The cash food fish are gone, right? So that's due to the same trends we see. In China, the pollution is so bad that the soil is now screwed for 100 years. Fukushima, disaster, you know, nuclear energy, catastrophe. Absolutely, so the supply of food is diminishing due to various economic and ecological disasters in hotspots. In Brazil, that just came out with a report, a huge drought. California, enormous droughts, all being scorched. So I just want to talk about, we got about 2 minutes left. You mentioned about food prices. Now, there's two components in food prices. Because you're an economist and a geopoliticist and an environmentalist, we're going to stretch over all these different, you know, because you're a generalist, essentially, is what you are, because you have actual knowledge about how things are connected, unlike a lot of writers who are very focused on a silo, and they get kind of in these traps where they don't see the connection. So you talk about food prices. There's two components. One is on the supply of food issue, there's constraints because of climate disaster. Yeah. But on the other hand, there's also money printing that's going on to bail out banks. And so in this country, when a lot of the food prices and the inflation overall, which is really 9%, not the government stated 2%, it has to do with the irresponsibility of the central banks. And people love their house prices going up, even though it's a bubble.
Well, some certain people, people who own houses.
Right. To what extent is this cognitive dissonance fed by that illusion of rising house prices and the money printing that's stopping these folks from doing the right thing and protecting themselves against flooding?
Well, you know, the problem is that for the last, say, 50 years or so, this is how we've made growth happen. You know, growth. It's not been, obviously there has been real innovations and industrial innovations and things, but all those innovations have slowed down dramatically in terms of manufacturing. And more, the economic system has relied on this financialization and effectively creating innovative ways in which to basically create debt. And from creating more and more debt, you create your profit because people have to pay it back on interest. And this is basically how they've been creating a way of creating growth. And so, again, it's like we've just fallen back on the same thing. You know, let's just basically pump more money into the system, get inflation, asset prices going up, we'll make some money. The people who benefit from that primarily are not even actually property owners as such. I mean, your general average house owner, yeah, you know, for a while, some people will have their houses a bit more, make some money out of that. But the people who are benefiting from this are a tiny minority of people involved in that speculative bubble who have the assets, who are basically making millions, if not billions. But you can't pay that money back because, in a way, it's not really real. It's not based on reality.
It's not a productive asset.
It's not productive.
You can't grow, you know, almonds on a bubble, a housing Ponzi bubble.
Absolutely. And
so you're running out of food. And Nafeez, we're out of time. Thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you.
Okay, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Nafeez Ahmed, author and environment writer at The Guardian. If you'd like to get in touch with us, tweet us at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.